So today we have a very special school meeting, the first of the term, because this is when we present the Heritage Award. And this year it goes to Captain Jamie Sands from the class of 1988. But before I give you a little bit of more information or introduce him more formally, I did want to acknowledge some very special guests who are with us this morning, beginning with Captain Sands' parents, also his wife and son, and also Gus Lipman from the class of '89 and Ed Harvey from the class of 1988. Welcome back to Deerfield. They love to welcome you back. So, for those of you who are new, the Heritage Award was established in 1983 and is presented annually to a Deerfield alumnus or alumna whose professional and personal achievements represent a special contribution to the betterment of society. As I just said, this year's recipient is Captain Jamie Sands of the class of 1988. In just a moment, Nathan Hu, class of 2019, will speak with Captain Sands. But first, I would like to read the award citation. You arrived at Deerfield as a postgraduate, and as one teacher said, jumped right in and quickly established friendships and demonstrated leadership. You were described as, and I quote, congenial and kind, always willing to lend a hand, listen to someone, or offer support. Your compassion and concern for others took you to the Greenfield Survival Center, where you volunteer several days a week serving those in need. In the 30 years since you graduated from Deerfield, you have personified the Academy's ideals of loyalty and integrity. You attended the United States Naval Academy and began your career on board the USS Saginaw and the USS John Rogers before becoming a Navy SEAL. Throughout your career, you have held leadership positions, including Executive Officer of SEAL Team 2, Commanding Officer of SEAL Team 8, and Commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 2. You conducted special operations, oversaw 900 SEALs, and commanded combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. In addition to the Middle East, you deployed to Europe, leading and inspiring through example. Recognized as a strategic thinker, strong leader, and skilled tactician, you were selected for the Navy's Federal Executive Fellowship Program and served as a counterterrorism and public policy fellow at Duke University. Following this, you went to the Pentagon as a Director of Counterterrorism and Operations. You currently serve as the Vice President of Joint Special Operations University at U.S. Special Operations Command in Tampa, Florida. Ever concerned for the well-being of those around you, you recently oversaw an innovative resiliency program to mitigate the effects of multiple combat deployment on SEALs and their families. In a life distinguished by service and commitment, you truly exemplify the Academy's motto, be worthy of your heritage. Deerfield is so proud to count you among its alumni and to honor you with the Heritage Award. Thank you, Jamie, for coming back. And now I would like to turn the floor over to Nathan, who's going to begin asking some great questions. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you, Dr. Curtis. We'll get right into the questions.
All right.
So to start off, what is your strongest memory from your Deerfield days as a student?
I think, memories evoke feelings, right? So I would have to say that my strongest memory that brings up the feelings that I have of Deerfield, kind of a magical time where everything's still in front of you. A lot of unknowns, but a lot of excitement, was my friend Kenny Monroe, who was a great guitar player. And we were in Johnson, we'd sit down in the evenings, and we'd have Kenny play us something. And he was one of those guys that you could just say, hey, play something from Led Zeppelin, for example. And he would be able to strum a few chords and figure it out and play. And it was me and my classmates, we'd just be sitting around talking and joking and listening to Kenny play. And it really, for me, symbolizes that connection, the growth, the excitement, and just kind of the amazing experience of being here at Deerfield.
All right, thank you. Next question. can you speak about why you chose to pursue becoming a Navy SEAL? Any specific stories or inspirations?
Absolutely. So the first thing I would say about being a Navy SEAL is we're a bit overrated. Right? You've probably read a lot about us. I think when I graduated from the Naval Academy, I wasn't really planning on being a SEAL. I actually went and I was in the surface Navy on ships. And the reason I didn't try out for it was because I didn't think I was good enough to do it. Like I was never really a great swimmer. I was kind of a mediocre athlete. So I thought, I could never do that. And it wasn't until I was in the Navy and I met some friends of mine who were SEALs, and I looked at them and I'm like, well, if they could do it, I think I can do it too. These guys. Which was exactly right, you know? They were not impressive, as neither am I. So I went and I went to BUD/S. And it's interesting that, Nathan, I think you and I spoke a little bit about this before, I think, but there was a point in my time at BUD/S, which is the Basic Underwater Demolition School, which is our 6 months of basic SEAL training. A really good time. Not. And it was in first phase, in the first two months of it, where I really decided I was going to be a SEAL. And I can remember a specific point. We had to do life saving. If anybody's a lifeguard or has done ocean life saving, it's pretty difficult. A lot of times the people that you're rescuing, they're panicked and they don't necessarily want to be rescued. Well, at BUD/S, they throw a little twist in it where you have to rescue a Navy SEAL who definitely does not want to be rescued. And he actually wants to drown you as you're going out there. So you have to do it 4 times, and and you had to pass all 4 evolutions in order to continue to go forward. The next thing was Hell Week. I can talk to you about Hell Week later, but so on my 4th try, there was Instructor Carnes, and he's out in the pool, and you have to swim out there, get underwater, grab their legs, spin them around, climb up their back, hook them, kick your hip in, and then just go like hell for the wall, trying to get there. In the meantime, they're going to try and take you to the bottom and get away, etc. So Instructor Carnes, as soon as I grabbed him, he kind of slipped right at me. He's a guy about my size. And he slips away from me, and now he's maybe 4 or 5 feet in front of me. I'm looking at him, and he's splashing water on me, and he's screaming at me. Like, not nice things, just screaming about what kind of person he thought I was, you know? And how I was never going to rescue him, and I would never amount to anything in my life. That was a summation, I think, of what was coming out of his mouth. And I was terrified. I don't know how else to say it. I just was so scared. I was scared of him. I was scared of the situation. And I was so scared of of not making it, of having to do, at that point, we'd already been through 6 weeks of really intense training, very uncomfortable training, of having to go back to the beginning if I didn't pass this evolution. And that's when I decided, I said, I'm going to do this. And I just kind of choked down all that fear and went for it and pulled him into the pool or to the wall. So that's when I decided to become a Navy SEAL in my own mind.
That sounds terrible, but it's a good life lesson.
Well said.
So, what is the most important lesson you learned from being a SEAL, and how do you think that lesson can be applied to others who are outside of the military?
All right, so I like to tell stories to kind of illustrate things. Plus, it'll help if some of you pay attention. I know it must be hard sometimes. I've listened to a lot of lectures and stuff myself that sometimes it's hard to pay attention. I'll tell this story. This is about, it kind of captures, I think, what I've really learned about being in the SEAL teams, or from being in the SEAL teams. That's a good life lesson, too. And the lesson is really that you are in charge and responsible for your own life. You make your own decisions, and kind of everything you do and all the decisions you make will lead you a certain direction. It doesn't happen by accident. You're not kind of victims of your own life, so to speak. So I'll use this as a little vignette. The first 3 years in the SEAL teams, I dove these mini submersibles, and so it's like a cigar-shaped thing. It looks like a little mini submarine, but it's full of water, so you're on dive status. And we would dive these things off of boats, off of submarines, and we could go long distances underwater, and we could put bombs under ships or go over the beach. And obviously, being underwater, it's very stealthy. It's called a SEAL delivery vehicle. So we were practicing, this just training now. We're in Bremerton, Washington, doing cold weather diving in November. So the water is super cold, and we're in dry suits that are really heavy. With the dry suits and the equipment on, it was about 300 pounds of gear. and you get in the boat. So we get the boat underneath an aircraft carrier at port, and the aircraft carrier, the bottom of the ship is at about 40 feet. So when you're diving at night, it's dark, of course, but when you go under a ship, it's like a different level of blackness. Like you can't even see the hand in front of your face. So we bottom up the SDV on the bottom of the ship, and the idea is to get out of the SDV with my partner, grab what looks like a trash can, but it's an limpet explosive module, and you put that underneath the ship. It's a big bomb, and then you just put it under the keel. When this thing goes off, it lifts the ship, creates an air bubble, and then breaks the ship's keel and sinks the ship. So I get out of the SDV, and when I got out, it caused the boat to shift, and it kind of slid underneath me and then pinned me like this to the bottom of the ship. And I remember thinking to myself as I was pinned, at 40 feet here, and it was about 11 o'clock at night, I can't see anything. I just started chuckling, and I thought, all the decisions in my life have led me right here, Like I really need to rethink some of my previous decision making. But again, I think that's a big lesson from the SEAL teams. Two primary lessons. Number one, you can't do it by yourself. That's what being a SEAL teaches you. Going to BUDS, I talked about BUDS and that basic training. It really highlights your weakness as an individual, but the strength that you get from others and your ability to do more. We call ourselves common people who do uncommon things, and I think that's accurate. But we're able to do those uncommon things because of our teammates and those that we go out with. If we're even diving at night, it's darn scary if you're doing that by yourself, but when you're with your friend, it's a lot less scary, and you're able to do more. So, the value of team, and then the other part is you really are responsible for your own life, and you got to think about that all the time. You make decisions that have impacts, how you treat each other, always treat people with respect, what decisions you make, what college you go to, who you choose as a spouse. All these are critical decisions in your life that you own. So make them deliberately and give them some thought, because they're going to lead you, hopefully not to the bottom of a ship, but somewhere better than that.
Awesome. So in your role as a commanding officer, you've probably had to make a lot of tough decisions. What advice would you give to others who have to make tough decisions in their careers or even in their lives?
I think that's one of my most difficult decisions as a commanding officer was most recently. I was in command of the East Coast SEAL team, so I had about 9 SEAL teams and components working for me and with me. And I had to relieve one of the commanding officers and command master chiefs. And they were dear friends of mine, like I'd known for 15 years. And they're great people. These are not bad people. But they made some bad decisions. And I think when you have to make a difficult decision like that, what I try and do is, number one, I try and keep my priorities straight. And what I mean by that is you have to recognize what your role is in an organization or in your own life when you're making a decision. Like, understand where you're coming from. And in my role, I was the commanding officer representing the Navy. And there's a level of accountability that has to be invoked in that role. These guys had essentially betrayed the trust that we had extended them, and I now is the Navy holding them accountable by their relief. The second thing, the thing that you'll struggle with the most, though, and it's one of the most challenging things with making decisions, is loyalties. And you constantly, at least for me, find myself in these tough decisions where my loyalties are at odds. And what I mean is my loyalty, for example, to the Navy or to the SEAL teams versus my loyalty to those individuals, like my close friends. And this happens your whole life. You'll see a close friend doing something that is not right or harmful. He's cheating on a test, or he's about to use an illegal drug or something, and you think, geez, I want to say something, but maybe it's not my place, and then maybe our friendship will be damaged. And so you suffer from the loyalty of your friendship versus the loyalty to do what you know is right. And so when you're making decisions, you got to have your priorities straight, you got to have your loyalties straight, and then at the end of the day, you just have to do what you think is right. And if you can line it up like that, you will rarely make a bad decision, I believe.
So the next question comes from a student in the Deerfield community. Of all your deployments, which one had the greatest impact on you and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my first deployment with the SEAL teams, when I was the SDVs, and as I mentioned, the SEAL delivery vehicles, and I wasn't having a great time. The command, weren't really deploying that much. The job itself was really difficult. I remember doing a 12-hour dive, a 13-hour dive off submarines at night. Just really tough stuff. And I thought, well, geez, maybe I'll just go to graduate school, and get an MBA. And so I did. I actually applied to get, a couple of different MBA programs. And then we got a new commanding officer, a guy named Commander Weirs. And he came in and he recognized the importance of us going and deploying and doing something meaningful. Because that's really one of the things we all look for in our lives, right? We want to have a life of meaning, a life ideally that's important. So he got us on a deployment to the Persian Gulf. And I remember being out there for 3 months into this 6-month deployment. And we were down there, we were taking down ships. Like we would actually, at night on fast boats, come up alongside ships and jump on them and take them down. Saddam's sons were actually taking down what's called the Shah al-Arab, and they were ironically dates, which they were able to smuggle out effectively and got a nice price, and oil on these small dhows. So we would take them down, which was one of the most fun things you could ever imagine doing. It's really great. So I'm having this great time on deployment. We're going all over the world. Got to go to the Seychelles. I don't know if everybody's been to the Seychelles. You should definitely go there. It's fantastic. And 3 months into the deployment, my letters started to show up. Acceptance letters, rejection letters, waitlist letters from the business schools I applied to. And I remember just ripping them up, thinking, I found what I really want to do. This is what I want to be. I want to do this with my life. So I think that was the most my most important probably deployment. The other ones were important for different reasons. I didn't see real combat until Iraq as a lieutenant commander, troop commander, then again as a commanding officer. And those are important for different reasons. But I go back to that first one because it really was my decision on who I wanted to become.
So as you came back from a lot of your deployments, you focused a lot of your efforts on soldiers with PTSD and helping those out. So what caused you to focus some of your more recent efforts on those, and how have these experiences really affected your view of active duty military members and the challenges they face coming back home?
Yeah, so I think we've not just me, but my chain of command, particularly a guy, Vice Admiral Tim Szymanski, who's he's my boss previously and really one of my role models and mentors. He focuses on this. If you talk to him, he says, hey, this is what I really care about. And I kind of feel the same way, where we have what's called these mild traumatic brain injuries. And traumatic brain injury caused by blast, like an explosion, it does different things to your brain than a concussion. A lot of you may have had concussions in sports, etc. So they're both bad, but they affect you differently. And we don't know that much about shearing or the injury that's caused by blast to the brain. We're learning more about it. So what we found in the SEAL teams is we do an awful lot of training. And don't take this literally, but it's an estimate now. About 80 to 83% of our blast injury, which you call this mild traumatic brain injury, occurs during training, not actually in combat. So we do it to ourselves. And so what we've tried to do are two things, kind of operationalizing what we call operationalizing the data. And we have blast measurements, blast gauges that we wear in our uniforms now we're training to see what kind of effect our training is having on us, specifically blast and overpressurization. And then we adjust what we're doing to reduce the SEAL's exposure to blast during training. So that's kind of one part of it that we've invested a lot in. And guys will come off the range, we'll do blood tests to see how their body's actually affected by it. We're really looking hard at this. The second part of it is, if we do have folks with traumatic brain injury, and there's different levels of this, right? There's very serious and there's some not quite as serious. I call them like functioning alcoholics. And they'll have 1 or 2 deployments, but they're still young and they're still trying to make the next rank and the next position, so they don't want to come off the train. So we tried to create a program where those guys could go and get help, but they could still deploy, they could still train. And so we needed to create an agile and really flexible support structure for medical treatment and evaluation. And so that's what we ended up doing last year at Portsmouth Naval Hospital. So that's I think, I don't know if that answers the question, at least the first part. That's why we care so much about it, because this is part of taking care of our people. Because what we see is, and you guys will know this, you probably know this already, right? But if something happens in your family, something happens to your dad, or your mom, your brother, your sister, it affects the whole family, right? It's not an independent unit. You're together. So we do this because we feel it's critical to take care of our people and their families, which their families serve too. You know, my mom and dad are here. My son Lucas is here. Got Ed Harvey, who's also just my wife Jennifer. I mean, it's all of us are serving, and so that's really been the impetus behind the traumatic brain injury focus: to take care of our people and to take care of their families.
So long before you did all this awesome stuff, you were a student at Deerfield.
Yeah.
So if you had a chance to go back and give some advice to yourself walking off the graduation stage, what would that advice be?
So it seems impossible. I was saying this, that it's already been 30 years. It really doesn't feel like that. I feel like I could just slip right back in here, you know, and start worrying about the next test or whatever I had going on. What I would tell myself is, I spent a lot of time as a young person. I was always worried about what other people were thinking. You know, I came here as a PG, so I was nervous. I didn't really know anybody, and had to kind of start new. Went from being kind of the big fish in a high school to being just brand new here at Deerfield with a lot of four-year students, obviously. And I think I would have told myself to be more bold, and also to take risk and to kind of hang it out there more. You know, I mentioned my son Lucas is here. Luke's 14. Luke has gone to a different school every year, his whole life growing up. And one of the things I'm so proud of with Luke is he'll walk right in there and kind of stick his hand out. You know, hey, I'm Luke. And which works most of the time, but sometimes it doesn't. You know, sometimes it's like, you guys are high school students, you know what I mean? And but he just picks himself up and brushes off and gets back in there. So I think that's what I would tell myself, is be more like Luke. Be more bold.
So after Deerfield, you headed off to the Naval Academy. So how was your transition there, and how did both of those experiences impact your development as a leader?
So Deerfield, I think, as most of you in the audience know, we're talking about this morning. It's such an amazing opportunity, and this place is so unusual. Ed mentioned this morning, talking to Luke about it, and he says, you know, if you want to go somewhere and get 8 years of experience in 4 years, Deerfield's the place. And I came here, and in a year, it really broadened my mind. And then, of course, the academics and the rigor that was required here helped me immensely as I went to the Naval Academy. The first year of the Naval Academy, you start with plebe summer, which is a bunch of just kind of a lot of pressure, a lot of rote memorization, a lot of people yelling at you and everything for about 6 weeks. And then the whole year, that's the thing, at the Naval Academy and the other service academies, it's a whole year where you're memorizing the lunch menu and having to recite it. You know, upperclassmen stops you, what's for chow? And you have to yell out the menu, you know, whatever it is, right? And all of these other things you have to memorize. You had to memorize the entire Russian fleet, for example, and all its aircraft. And you had to be able to spit out this information at a moment's notice to some random upperclassman walking by. So Deerfield really prepared me academically, and it also gave me, and what I mean specifically is it gave me the study habits I needed to be able to memorize all that stuff and spend all that time and still maintain my grades. So hugely helpful in the transition. And then, of course, Deerfield was the first time I lived away from home. You know, so some of you started that as early as 13 or 14. I was 18, and I really hadn't lived away from home yet. So it helped me with all of the homesickness and getting kind of through that and getting some experience with that up front before I went to the Naval Academy, and you really feel homesick during plebe summer. I remember turning 19 in my bunk at plebe summer thinking, this is the worst birthday I've ever had, you know? But yeah, so Deerfield really, it sets you up for success in life, I think, and obviously you have to make the most of it. You have to take advantage of it, but it gives you some great tools that help you succeed in tough situations.
So what are some other effects that Deerfield has had on your life, or other stories you'd like to share that you think are particularly telling of your experience at Deerfield?
I think the most profound effect is the friendships. And this gets, as I get older and older, it becomes more and more profound. Just the impact, the relationships that you're making right now have on you for your whole life. You have a network here that is unequaled. I went to Deerfield. I went to the Naval Academy. I'm in the SEAL teams. I've been to Duke. But there's no network more powerful than my Deerfield network. It's the first one. I was thinking actually about getting out of the Navy. Every 2 years I think about getting out of the Navy and make kind of a decision. And my Deerfield friends and relationships are the first place I went for advice and for insight into what I could expect in different roles in society. So super powerful. A real quick story. Ed Harvey, who's here in the crowd. Ed is a four-year student here at Deerfield, graduated in 1988. And Ed and I was working, and we were operating in Syria, and we were dropping bombs and missiles in Syria from afar. And Ed was in Qatar, I think. Qatar. Ed's in Qatar, and Ed speaks Russian, which he learned here at Deerfield. And so I'm in the Joint Operations Center, and I'm concerned about our forces on the ground, and we want to make sure that the Russian aircraft deconflict with our aircraft. Really a tense situation. As you can see, there's superpowers kind of touching up against each other. It could go poorly quickly. And so this lieutenant colonel in the Air Force calls me up, and he's telling me about how he is the guy talking to the Russians, right? Because he's the only one that really speaks Russian well enough. And so Ed and I are talking, and he's reassuring me that the Russians aren't going to bomb our guys. And then Ed goes to me, he goes, "Hey, is your name Jamie?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Did you go to Deerfield?" He goes, "This is Ed Harvey." I'm like, "Ed, how you doing? It's Jamie." And so you just never know. So I talk about the network on the outside, but also on the inside, where you're going to run into your classmates and what they're going to be doing. I mean, Ed literally was the representative for our entire country talking to the Russians. That's a Deerfield student, So it's the network and the relationships is what continues to affect me the most.
So for our final question, this is a little bit related to the award. You made it an objective to lead a life of service. Would you offer some reasons as to why you think service is important for anyone, but especially Deerfield students, to focus on?
Yeah, I love that question, and when I first learned that I was going to receive this award, I was frankly blown away. This is just an unbelievable honor, and I don't feel deserving of it. And as I started to kind of rationalize why in the world they would want to give me this award, I realized that this award wasn't as much about what I've personally done. It was much more about Deerfield recognizing the value that Deerfield as an institution we place in service to others. The military is just one way, right? This is just one way to serve. There are plenty of ways to serve. But really from Mr. Boyden on, it's always been kind of the reason behind Deerfield is to create great citizens who will serve this country and others, right? In ways that make the most of their unique talents and skills. And so I would offer that up to you to think about that. I think a lot of the tough discourse that goes on in our country right now is folks not really feeling a connection with the country. And that connection is a lot of times through civic duty, feeling like a citizen, and then treating each other with respect and having informed, educated discussions or even disagreements about things. But it really starts with your connection, and that connection is being part of something bigger than yourself. I can't imagine what I would have done without Deerfield, without the Naval Academy, without the SEAL teams and the Navy. It's really defined me. I just feel grateful and a lot of times kind of unworthy of how I've benefited from that service. It's certainly given more to me than I've given to it, I think. And so I would ask you to think about that, just the value of service. It's really it's a key part of Deerfield. It's a key part of what this school stands for, and it's a key part of our own Deerfield alumni identity. How do you serve others?
All right. Well, thank you for your time today. That's all for today, folks.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Good job.